In this video, I want to give you a guide to reach 1500 elo. This is going to be short, simple, and to the point. I'm going to give you the resources, and it's going to be up to you whether you put in the work to reach 1500 elo. So let's get started. The first thing we're going to do is come up with a checklist. This checklist will be applied every single move, and it starts off with asking yourself, why did my opponent make this move? So for example, in this position, my opponent had played a6. This was back when I was a 1400. Now, if I ask myself, what does a6 do? Well, it attacks the bishop, but it's also coming with an extra threat. You have to take or retreat here. You cannot do what I did in the game, which was play a4. Why? Because not only did a6 threaten the bishop, it also was threatening to trap the bishop if you decide to be greedy and keep the pin. After b5, bishop b3, c4, your bishop is gone. The next thing that you need to ask yourself, if I make this move, what is my opponent going to respond with? We can apply the same logic here to this position exactly after a6. If we had asked ourselves, after bishop to a4, what is my opponent going to respond with? Well, we would probably see the move b5 and see how these habits are going to start implementing better chess. The next thing, we always have to be looking at checks, captures, attacks. You've heard this a million times, but it's super duper important. Always be on the lookout for your checks. 4, we need to keep a mental note of our hanging pieces, because in positions with hanging pieces, there will be tactics that arise. If you keep your pieces defended at all times, or as much as possible, you can't defend everything all the time, but keep a mental note of those hanging pieces because they will get you into trouble. And 5, before moving a piece, you need to ask yourself if you're undefending anything. If yes, is the piece going to be attacked and capturable on the next move? So if your opponent can safely take the piece, then you need to find a better move. If you follow these 5 simple steps and implement them into your game, you will see an increase. Now, it's going to be hard at first to implement these things. And that's why I'm going to recommend that you play 15 plus 10 or a longer time control until you get used to doing these things faster and faster and faster, right? But this alone will increase your elo. Let's talk about openings. If you're under 1000 elo, don't worry about opening theory at all. Just focus on opening principles, such as controlling the center, developing your pieces, castling. Don't move a piece multiple times in a row. You've heard it a gazillion times. You've seen it in all these videos. We're not going to spend so much time on that. If you're under 1000 elo, you really need to know how to punish early queen attacks because, let's be honest, they are quite common there. After we hit 1000 elo and above, we should probably get a little bit more familiar with our openings. So choose one as white, one as black, and start to learn how to use them. Learn a little bit of the opening moves, understand a little bit of the ideas. You still don't need to learn a bunch of theory because opponents at your level are not going to be playing a bunch of moves that you're studying if you're using the engine. And as you get more comfortable in these positions, you're going to learn the common mistakes that happen in them, and you're going to be able to punish them. And eventually you'll learn what the best moves are and the ideas, etc. And you'll start to gain rating as you do that. It's very important that if you see a weird move in a game, after the game, use the engine and see if it was a good move or a bad move. And if it was a good move, see how you should have responded. And if it was a bad move, see how you can punish that bad move for next time. In my opinion, openings are not the most important at these levels. As you get higher and higher and higher, they're going to become more important to get really good positions out of the opening that you're comfortable in. But to reach 1500 elo, you just need a basic understanding. Let's talk about the middle game. This is likely one of the spots that a lot of people struggle with, because you get to a position and you're like, what do I even freaking do? Well, if you ever ask yourself that, and you've gone through your checklist, there's no captures, checks, attacks that are good, just improve your worst piece. Ask yourself, what is my worst piece? And then ask yourself, where would this piece belong, and then come up with a plan to get the piece to that square. Stop creating just one move threats. Don't attack something with a knight if they can just block it and then kick your knight away. You're not making progress that way. At the lower levels, we typically are pretty greedy and we don't focus on the opponent's moves, threats. So we need to start getting into the habit of seeing, what does my opponent really want in this position? And if there's a way that you can stop him from doing that and improving their position, that may be the best plan in your position, is to stop their plan. And once again, going back to the checklist, always, always, always ask yourself why your opponent made a move, even if it looks very stupid. If it looks like your opponent gave you a free rook, ask yourself, is this a free rook or is this a trap? Always be on the lookout for blunders and tactics. Tactics are going to decide games at this level. So, on top of all of this stuff, you should be doing puzzles every single day and learn these common tactical patterns, which you will if you're doing your tactical puzzles every single day. We need to be sharp because under 1500 and even over 1500, tactics decide games. Understanding the concept of weak squares is very important. In this game, I'm playing a blitz game and I play the move d5. At first glance, this looks like just a free pawn, right? It's attacked 3 different times and we're threatening to take the pawn. So if my opponent had taken, I was going to play knight to b4, and that's another attack. Notice that this check doesn't do anything because we can simply just attack the queen and the bishop would be protecting the knight. But without that said, my opponent decided to play knight to e2 and they completely missed the idea of d5. We're going to take because it was a free pawn, but not only that, notice this d3 square. This d3 square is super duper weak because of this move that they played e3. So we're trying to take advantage of this. And the way that we're going to do that is by playing knight to b5. We could have stuck the queen in there immediately, but we want a knight on that square. And I think the reason why this is not the best way to go about it is because of d4. However, my opponent decided, me give check. So once again, the knight is protected by the bishop. We don't have to worry about that. Now the queen has to move, and we cement that knight in there. And watch how this knight wins the game. So we just look at this beautiful piece. The game is decided by this one piece. If you can take advantage of your opponent's weakness, you will win games alone on that. Opponent goes here, we kick it away. We don't want them to have a nice knight either. So they have to go back. Just look at this. Look at that knight. The knight is just standing there. And we eventually lose it. But our position is so good. And the weakness around the king is just too much. And eventually we won material. And now we just convert the game. That was also an outpost. So we took advantage of the weak square and created an outpost for my knights. And knights, typically, you want to try to get them to the outpost in the position. Let's talk about the endgame. This is one of the most overlooked aspects of the game because we're always like, I need to study openings, try this new opening this, opening that. But then you find yourself in an endgame and you're like, yeah, it's because you neglected the endgame study. In the endgame, time is money. You don't have time to mess around. In the opening, you can kind of get away with some inaccurate moves, but in the endgame, one wrong move can decide the game. This position is from my speedrun account. And black is completely winning here. But I got very spooked because there's a common breakthrough for white after g6. Let me just show it real quick. So let's say that I make a random king move. This is obviously bad, but if they play g6, there's a common move which you take, and the point is to play f6. And the point is, if you take this pawn, they're going to take here and they're queening. So you have to take, and then after this, you're getting through. Ignore the eval. So I mistakenly got spooked and played h6. This loses the game on the spot. I was lazy and I did not calculate that, you're just quicker by allowing them to break through. You make the queen first, you stop the pawn. Regardless, I played this. And now can you find the drawing move for white? Yeah, they can play f6 here. And the point is, if I take this, they just take here and they're going to be able to promote, and it's going to be a draw. So this one oversight lost me the game, basically. My opponent, however, at this range, played g6. Had they studied their endgames, they probably would have found f6. At this level range, I believe that just learning the basics of the endgame is more than enough. And I'm going to give you a great resource to learn all of that. There's a free course on Chessable called The Basic Endgames. You don't have to go through it all. The more you go through it, the better. But I would highly recommend you go through the king and pawn and rook and king endgames. Those are the two most important endgames to know. And a very simple rule in the endgame is that if you're up material, trade down material. And if you're losing the endgame, you're down material, avoid trades at all costs. So here are some of the most important endgames to learn and techniques: opposition and shouldering. These are crucial to endgames, and you will learn all about that in the endgame course that I'm going to provide you with. It's going to be up to you to put in the work and study it. Of course, you got to go through the king and pawn, king and rook. I would highly recommend going through the king and queen as well. And of course, do I even need to mention it? You need to know how to checkmate using a rook and king versus king. And of course, queen, but that's even easier. Opposite colored bishop endgames can be very important to understand as well. And a common thing is that they are very drawish. And the reason for that is because they can't really oppose each other. So a lot of the times, if you have an extra pawn, it's not enough to win those endgames. You can try and use chess.com's endgame practice drills as well. It's free, and why would you not? I mean, they have all kinds of everything. Like, you can go in here, you can pawn endgame, winning king and pawn. Okay, so this is opposition, right? How do you win this? Well, we push, they go here. Now we're shouldering the king away, and we've created a red carpet. This is the most basic of basic endgames. And then we can just create L opposition using the queen. And then we just bring the king and deliver a checkmate. Once again, opposition. We're going to go here. They go here, and look at that. Now this you can utilize and practice. I'm going to provide you with a quick little daily schedule for anybody that, doesn't really know how they should manage their time. I'll kind of start off by saying this is somewhat what I did when I was trying to reach 2000, but I put more time than this into it. And if you have more than an hour to spend per day, I highly recommend maybe doubling all of this, basically. So we can start off with puzzles. This is very important because we want to warm up before we hop into a live rapid game and get tactics flowing in our head, and maybe a puzzle that we see before our game, maybe that same tactic will arise in the game. So that's why it's important. So we're going to recommend 10 minutes before playing, do puzzles. And this is if you have 1 hour per day. Now we're going to play a rapid game. If you're playing 10 plus 0, then this is going to take roughly 20 minutes. And immediately after, you're going to analyze the game for roughly 10 minutes. It all depends on what happens in the game. Some games will have more to analyze, some will not. If you play 99% accuracy, you likely don't have anything to analyze, and there was likely just a blunder. And after that, start studying. Study your end games, or maybe you need to study a little bit of your middle game plans, of your opening choice, or maybe you need to brush up on some opening theory if you're at that level yet. But really don't neglect your study time. And you can do more puzzles than 10 minutes as well. That will not hurt. I definitely did more than 10 minutes of puzzles. And of course, if you're going to play a 15 plus 10 rather than the 10 plus 0, it's going to take longer than 20 minutes to play the game. Sometimes those games can go up to 40 minutes long. Now, when analyzing the game, it's very important to look at different positions and different ideas in those positions. If you had calculated something in the game and you thought it might work, but you didn't play it because you're like, I'm not 100% sure, go back after the game and use the engine to see whether your thought process was correct. And if it was, well, then maybe next time you'll be a little bit more confident in your calculation skills. And if you were wrong and there was a refutation, see what the refutation was and try to figure out why you didn't see that in the game. If you missed a tactic in the game, then be sure to look at the tactic, see why it works, and try to keep the tactic in your mind for next time. If your opponent blundered and you missed it, ask yourself why. Was it a one move blunder? And if it was, did you use the checklist? Because you shouldn't be missing one move blunders if you're using the checklist. So you might have to go back to the basics and start re-implementing those checklist ideas. Was it a tactical blunder? If it was, well then of course we need to understand it, so let's dig deeper. And let's see what the engine is saying about this tactical blunder and how we could have took advantage of it. I'll end this by saying chess is a very hard game, and to reach 1500 elo, I don't think it's going to take you all that long, but you need to be putting in consistent work. Progress does not happen overnight, but if you can consistently put in the work, play your games, analyze, do your puzzles, study, you will make progress. And this is coming from somebody who was 1300 elo about a year, probably a year and a half ago, and is now 2000. And trust me, if I can do it, you can do it as well. If you enjoyed this video and you got some value from it, please let me know in the comment section, drop a like, and of course, hit subscribe. We post daily videos playing rapid chess. Check them out.